Torchlight flickers across a subterranean chamber, illuminating priests in a frenzied dance. This is not a scene from a film, but a glimpse into one of the 50 forgotten cults of the ancient world. Throughout history, countless belief systems have risen and vanished, leaving behind only fragments of their existence. We are about to journey into the shadows to uncover these lost religions, from secret soldier brotherhoods to ecstatic rites that challenged empires. You will discover 50 of the most fascinating and obscure cults that time almost erased. We will explore why people castrated themselves for a goddess, what secrets were whispered in underground temples, and how a teenage emperor tried to replace all the Roman gods with a single black stone. What do you think drives people to embrace the strange and the divine? The Great Mother arrived in Rome not with a whisper but with a prophecy. In the tumultuous years of the Second Punic War, the Roman Senate, desperate for divine intervention against Hannibal, consulted the Sibylline books. The oracles decreed that only the sacred black stone of Cybele, the great mother of the gods, could save the Republic. This was no ordinary deity. Originating in the highlands of Phrygia, Cybele was a goddess of caverns, wild beasts, and untamed nature, her power both creative and fiercely destructive. Her worship was a stark contrast to the formal, state-controlled rituals of Rome. It was a religion of raw, ecstatic passion. Followers would work themselves into a frenzy with wild, percussive music, clashing cymbals, and relentless drumming, often whipping themselves into a state of divine madness. But the most startling aspect of her cult was the dedication of her priests, the Galli. In a single, irreversible act of devotion, these men would castrate themselves in a public ritual, emulating Cybele's doomed lover, Attis. This violent surrender of masculinity was their ultimate offering to the mother. The Roman state officially welcomed the goddess in 204 BC, her sacred black stone, a meteorite believed to be her earthly embodiment, ceremoniously brought to the Palatine Hill. Each spring, the city held the Megalasia festival in her honor, with lavish theatrical performances and games. Yet, for all this official acceptance, the Roman elite viewed the cult's Eastern practices with deep suspicion and anxiety. The wild, emotional rites of the Galli, their effeminate attire, and their shocking act of self-mutilation stood in direct opposition to the Roman ideals of discipline and masculine virtue. How could a civilization built on order and control reconcile itself with a deity whose very essence was chaotic, untamable ecstasy? The cult of Cybele existed in a perpetual state of tension, simultaneously a state-sanctioned protector and a deeply subversive foreign influence whispering of a different kind of power. While the Galli worshipped their mother goddess in public spectacle, another, far more secretive faith was taking root in the shadows beneath Roman streets. This was the cult of Mithras, a mystery religion open only to men, and it became the spiritual backbone of the Roman legions. Unlike the public processions of Cybele, Mithraism thrived in clandestine sanctuaries known as Mithraea. These were often long, narrow chambers built underground or designed to feel like caves, deliberately recreating the mythical grotto where the god Mithras performed his central, defining act. At the heart of every Mithraeum was a carved relief depicting this sacred scene, the Tauroctony. It shows Mithras, a youthful figure in a Phrygian cap, kneeling on a great bull, pulling back its head and plunging a dagger into its throat. This was not merely a hunting scene. Every element was a piece of a complex cosmic code. The scorpion, the dog, the snake, and the raven that accompany Mithras are not just animals. They are symbols of constellations, and the dying bull itself represents the constellation Taurus. The entire image is a star map, a spiritual allegory for the salvation of the human soul through the god's sacrificial act. To understand this celestial secret, a man had to prove himself worthy through a demanding initiation process. There were 7 distinct grades of membership, each with its own trials and symbolic titles. A new member might enter as a raven, a messenger between the earthly and divine realms. He could advance to become a bride, symbolizing a sacred marriage to the god, then a soldier, swearing an oath of loyalty to Mithras. Higher ranks included the lion, the Persian, the Heliodromus or sun runner, and finally the father who led the congregation. The rituals for each stage were intense and shrouded in secrecy, likely involving tests of endurance, exposure to heat and cold, and symbolic rebirth. For a Roman soldier, this structured hierarchy and demand for courage and discipline would have felt deeply familiar. It mirrored the military chain of command and offered a tight-knit brotherhood, a spiritual fraternity that provided solace and meaning far from home. Its message of struggle, sacrifice, and ultimate triumph resonated powerfully with men who faced death as part of their profession. So why did this powerful, soldier-backed cult ultimately vanish? Its greatest rival was another growing faith that also promised salvation and eternal life, Christianity. The two shared some surprising similarities, including a ritual meal of bread and wine. But Christianity offered something Mithraism did not. It was open to everyone, men and women, slave and free, soldier and civilian. The battle for the soul of the Roman Empire was not fought on open battlefields, but in these hidden underground chambers, a silent war of symbols and sacrifice that would reshape the world. Yet the promise of a blessed afterlife was not exclusive to the soldiers' underground sanctuary. For over 1,000 years, a different path to salvation drew countless seekers to a small town near Athens. This was the cult of the Eleusinian Mysteries, an institution so revered that to reveal its secrets was a crime punishable by death. At its heart was a story of profound loss and miraculous return, the myth of the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone. When Hades, god of the underworld, abducted the young Persephone, a grief-stricken Demeter plunged the world into an endless winter, withholding the gift of growth from the earth. Only when a compromise was reached, allowing Persephone to return to the world for part of each year, did life bloom once more. This cycle of descent and return, of death and rebirth, formed the powerful emotional core of the mysteries. It offered a direct parallel to the human condition, promising that just as the grain seed dies in the earth to bring forth new life, so too could the human soul find renewal beyond death. Each year, thousands of initiates would walk the sacred way from Athens to the sanctuary at Eleusis. This was not a passive pilgrimage, it was a multi-day immersive drama. The initiates, known as Mystai, would reenact Demeter's desperate search, fasting, drinking a special barley potion, and enduring a symbolic descent into darkness, all guided by the Hierophant, the high priest who revealed the sacred objects. What were these holy relics? We simply do not know for certain. The vow of secrecy was absolute. Historians speculate they may have been an ear of wheat, symbolic of the life that springs from apparent death, or perhaps other sacred objects tied to the goddess's story. The climax of the ceremony, held in the great hall called the Telesterion, was a moment of blinding revelation. In that darkened space, something was shown, something was said, and something was performed. Whatever the initiates witnessed in that flash of light and sound, it was powerful enough to transform them. The philosopher Cicero, himself an initiate, wrote that Eleusis taught humanity not only how to live in joy but how to die with better hope. How could a single ritual, repeated for centuries, hold such transformative power? The secret died with the last Hierophant. The sanctuary was destroyed by invading Goths in the 4th century, and the silence fell forever. We are left only with the echo of its promise, a testament to the enduring human desire to peer behind the final curtain and glimpse what lies beyond. But the profound silence of Eleusis was not the only voice whispering of life beyond death in ancient Greece. Another, more personal path to salvation existed, one that placed the burden of purity directly upon the individual. This was Orphism, a mystical sect that traced its origins to the mythical poet and musician Orpheus. whose music could charm stones and bend the will of the gods of the underworld himself. His legendary descent into Hades to retrieve his wife, Eurydice, was more than just a tragic love story for his followers. It was a powerful allegory for the soul's own journey. Orphics believed that human nature was a divine conflict. They held that our true self, the soul, was a fragment of the divine, a fallen god trapped within a physical body, which they saw as a prison or a tomb. Our very existence was a cycle of reincarnation, a relentless wheel of birth and death from which the soul sought release. The goal of life, therefore, was to achieve purity and break this cycle, finally escaping the bodily prison to rejoin the divine. This demanded a life of extreme asceticism. Orphics practiced strict vegetarianism, for they believed in the transmigration of souls and saw the act of eating meat as a form of cannibalism, potentially consuming a fellow divine spark. They also abstained from animal sacrifices, beans, and wine in certain contexts, all in an effort to live a life free from the taint of violence and primal desire. Their creation story was as radical as their lifestyle. In the Orphic cosmogony, the familiar pantheon was rearranged in a startling new myth. They told of how the first ruler of the universe, the god Zagreus, was the son of Zeus and his own daughter, Persephone. Zeus intended this divine child to be his heir, but the Titans, the old gods, lured the boy with toys, tore him apart, and devoured him. An enraged Zeus incinerated the Titans with his thunderbolt, and from their soot humanity was born. This explained our dual nature, part divine from the consumed Zagreus and part wicked Titan. From the ashes, Zeus retrieved the child's heart and used it to impregnate the mortal Semele, who then gave birth to a second incarnation of the god Dionysus. For the Orphics, this resurrected Dionysus was the central figure of hope, proving that the divine could be reborn from destruction, and they did not journey into that darkness unprepared. Buried with Orphic initiates were tiny, cryptic artifacts known as the Orphic gold tablets. These fragile leaves of gold foil inscribed with verse were passports for the dead. They contained precise instructions for the soul's journey in the underworld. One might read, "You will find a spring on the left and a white cypress standing beside it. Do not even approach this spring. You will find another, cold water flowing from the lake of memory. Say, I am a child of earth and starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone. I am parched with thirst and perishing. Give me quickly cold water flowing from the lake of memory." By reciting these words, the soul could avoid the water of forgetfulness, retain its memory, and be guided to join the company of the blessed heroes and gods, finally free from the cycle of suffering. Here was a salvation you could hold in your hand, a whispered map for the most important journey of all. The same divine force that offered the Orphics a path to salvation through purity also possessed a terrifying, untamed face. Dionysus, the twice-born god, was not just a symbol of resurrected hope, but the lord of wine, ecstasy, and uninhibited chaos. His worship was a force of nature, a temporary shattering of the very social order that defined ancient Greek life. At the forefront of this revolution were the Maenads, women who abandoned their looms, their homes, and their families to answer the wild call of the god. They would flee to the mountainsides, clothed in fawnskins, their hair loose and wild, waving the sacred theosis, a fennel staff tipped with a pine cone. There, under the moon, they would dance themselves into a trance-like state of mania, a divine madness. Their chanting and percussive music were believed to summon the god himself among them. This frenzy could culminate in a shocking act known as sparagmos, the ritual tearing apart of live animals with their bare hands. They would then perform omophagy, eating the raw flesh, an act of communion through which they believed they consumed the raw power and presence of the god. For these women, this was not an act of savagery, but the ultimate liberation. In a society that strictly confined them to the domestic sphere, the cult of Dionysus offered a sanctioned, holy space to cast off all constraints. They became possessed by the god, becoming powerful, fearsome, and utterly free, if only for a short, intoxicating time. This was religion as a psychological pressure valve, a necessary chaos that prevented the rigid social order from cracking under its own weight. But how could such raw, unpredictable energy be contained within a civilized city? The Athenians found a way. They channeled the wild spirit of Dionysus into the heart of their civic life, transforming ecstatic ritual into structured art. The same god who inspired mountaintop frenzies became the patron of the great theater of Dionysus at the foot of the Acropolis. The city Dionysia, a massive annual festival in his honor, gave birth to Greek tragedy and comedy. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides competed for prizes, presenting dramas that explored the very themes his cult embodied: the conflict between order and chaos, the hubris of mortals, and the terrifying power of the divine. The ecstatic cries of the Maenads were formalized into the structured chorus of the plays. The ritual sparagmos, the tearing apart of a living being, found its echo in the tragic dismemberment of a hero's life and family on stage. The cult that once threatened to tear society apart now provided the stories that helped hold it together, asking its citizens to reflect on the darkest corners of human nature from the safety of a theater seat. The same god who promised liberation through madness also taught civilization about itself through the power of a story. From the structured chaos of the Greek theater, we sail to the shores of Alexandria, where two Egyptian deities were being remade for the world. The cult of Isis began not as a secret mystery, but as the ancient, enduring faith of the Nile. Yet when she traveled across the Mediterranean, Isis transformed into something entirely new, a universal mother and a goddess of miraculous power. She was the wife who reassembled her murdered husband Osiris, the mother who protected her infant son Horus from countless dangers. To her new followers in Greece and Rome, this narrative of devotion and resilience made her the ultimate protectress. She was a sorceress whose true name held cosmic power, a magician who could command fate itself. Her temples, called Isia, were not dark, hidden places but welcoming sanctuaries often built near ports, offering solace and a sense of community to travelers, merchants, and soldiers far from home. We know the details of her initiation because one Roman author, Apuleius, left us a startlingly personal account. In his novel, The Golden Ass, the protagonist Lucius, after a magical mishap turns him into a donkey, finally finds salvation through Isis. He undergoes an elaborate, costly, and deeply transformative initiation into her cult. Described over several days, it involves ritual purifications, a 10-day period of strict abstinence, and a final, breathtaking ceremony where he witnesses a direct vision of the goddess and is symbolically reborn, restored to his human form. This was not a faith of passive belief, but of direct personal experience and divine encounter. But Isis did not travel alone. She was often worshipped alongside a god who was in many ways a political creation, Serapis. In the wake of Alexander the Great's conquest, the new Greek rulers of Egypt, the Ptolemies, faced a challenge. How could they unite their Greek administrators with their millions of native Egyptian subjects? The solution was a new god, engineered for the purpose. Serapis was a brilliant fusion of two Egyptian deities, Osiris, the lord of the underworld, and Apis, the sacred bull worshipped in Memphis. To this Egyptian core, the Ptolemies grafted the familiar features of Greek gods like Zeus, the king of the gods, and Asclepius, the god of healing. The result was a towering, majestic figure depicted as a bearded man resembling Zeus, often with a grain measure on his head to symbolize his role as a provider of abundance. His great temple in Alexandria, the Serapeum, became one of the most magnificent in the ancient world, a library and healing center that attracted pilgrims from across the known world. Serapis was a god of the underworld who also granted health in the present life, a divine king who ensured the fertility of the land, a universal figure who appealed to both Greek philosophical thought and Egyptian traditional belief. Together, Isis and Serapis formed a divine pair that offered a complete spiritual package: salvation, healing, and a caring community. A powerful combination that would see their worship spread to the very farthest corners of the Roman Empire. While the universal gods of Isis and Serapis appealed to the masses, a quieter, more practical devotion was stabled with the Roman cavalry. In the dusty forts and bustling way stations of the empire's frontiers, soldiers and traders paid homage to a different kind of protector, the Celtic goddess Epona. She was the divine guardian of horses, donkeys, and mules, the living engines that powered the military and economic might of Rome. Her origins were Gallic, springing from the lands of the Celts, who revered the horse as a symbol of sovereignty, wealth, and war. But her practical value was so immediate that her cult was eagerly adopted by the very legions that had conquered her people. Roman cavalrymen, whose lives and livelihoods depended on the health and stamina of their mounts, saw in Epona a crucial ally. A soldier might pray to Mars for courage in battle, but he would whisper a prayer to Epona for the strength of the horse that carried him into the fight. Her protection extended far beyond the battlefield. For the merchants whose caravans of mules crisscrossed treacherous mountain passes, and for the farmers who relied on draft animals to plow their fields, Epona was a goddess of daily survival and economic stability. She safeguarded the vital link in every chain of transport and agriculture. So deep was this reverence that her worship penetrated the heart of the empire itself. Small shrines to Epona have been found within the barracks of Rome, making her one of the very few Celtic deities to receive official veneration inside the capital. Her image was a familiar comfort, depicted not as a wild, untamed force, but as a serene and maternal figure. She is almost always shown seated side saddle on her gentle, powerful horse, a posture of calm control and intimate connection with her animal. Often she holds a cornucopia, the horn of plenty, overflowing with fruits and grain, symbolizing the abundance that these faithful creatures help to bring forth from the land. Sometimes a small foal is nestled beside her or even looks up from beneath the mare, a tender symbol of fertility and new life. In a world of grand cosmic mysteries and demanding state religions, the cult of Epona offered a different kind of sacred bond, a humble, heartfelt gratitude for the loyal companions who shared in humanity's labor. Yet this divine bond with the animal world could take on much stranger and more visceral forms. Across the empire, in private households and secret gatherings, worshippers raised their hands not to a maternal horse goddess, but to a bronze or silver emblem shaped like a hand in a gesture of blessing. This was the sacred symbol of Sabazios, a god whose origins lay in the wild lands of Thrace and Phrygia. His cult was a noisy, ecstatic affair, a whirlwind of clashing bronze and hissing serpents that both fascinated and unnerved the Roman establishment. Sabazios was a difficult god to pin down, often syncretized with more familiar deities. To some, he was a version of Dionysus, sharing his connection to ecstatic liberation. To others, he appeared as a sky father akin to Zeus or the Roman Jupiter, a ruler of the cosmos, but his worship was uniquely his own. The heart of his ritual was a procession, a raucous parade where followers, gripped by divine frenzy, would clash cymbals and drums to summon the god's presence. The most startling element was the use of live snakes. A serpent, a creature symbolizing rebirth and healing, would be lowered into the chest of a devoted initiate, a chilling, physical communion with the divine. But the most enduring relics of his worship are the mysterious bronze hands. These life-sized votive objects, often found in household shrines, are covered in a cryptic collage of symbols. A pine cone, perhaps for fertility or immortality, rests in the palm. A lizard crawls up the thumb. A miniature ladder is affixed to the ring finger, representing the soul's ascent to the heavens. Perched on the fingertips, you might find a tiny figure of the goddess Victory, a ram's head, or a miniature bust of Sabazios himself. Each hand is a portable, personal map of the entire Sabasian cosmos, a divine blessing frozen in metal. For his followers, this was a faith of direct, tangible power and protection. But to many conservative Romans, the cult of Cybele was something else entirely, a foreign superstition, a disturbing and noisy import from the East. The wild rites, the handling of serpents, the strange symbols, all of it seemed to threaten the traditional Roman way of life, the mos maiorum. It was just one more whisper from the edges of the empire, a reminder that the gods of conquered peoples could not be so easily silenced. The strange, noisy rituals of Cybele were a world away from the quiet, imposing authority of the state-sponsored temples that began to rise across the Roman Empire. These new sanctuaries were not dedicated to a god of ecstasy or a protector of animals, but to a living man. The cult of the imperial cult transformed the Roman emperor himself into a divine figure, a political and spiritual innovation that bound a vast, disparate empire together. It began not with a decree, but with a murder. After the assassination of Julius Caesar, his heir Octavian, who would become the Emperor Augustus, skillfully manipulated the Senate to officially deify his murdered adoptive father. This act made Augustus the son of a god, the Divi Filius, granting him a unique, semi-divine aura that legitimized his rule in a republic still wary of kings. Augustus was cautious, however. He never demanded worship of his own living person in Rome itself, a step too far for traditional Roman sensibilities. Instead, he encouraged the veneration of his genius, the divine spirit of his family line, and his guiding force. It was in the provinces that the cult truly flourished as a tool of unity. In the eastern half of the empire, in places like Greece and Asia Minor, the idea of worshipping a ruler as a god was an ancient tradition. Cities vied for the honor of building the most magnificent temple to Roma, the goddess who personified the Roman state, and Augustus. These temples became centers of provincial loyalty, where local elites could demonstrate their allegiance and integrate themselves into the Roman power structure. A complex infrastructure of priests chosen from the wealthiest and most influential local citizens administered the cult. They funded lavish public games, sacrifices, and festivals on the emperor's birthday or the anniversary of his accession, turning political loyalty into a vibrant communal celebration. But in the western provinces like Gaul and Britain, the concept was foreign and strange. Here, the Romans had to build the system from the ground up. They established a central altar for the entire province, such as the famous one at Lugdunum in Gaul, where delegates from 60 tribes would gather annually to swear oaths of loyalty and perform sacrifices to the divine emperor. For these conquered peoples, participation was less about genuine belief and more a stark public demonstration of submission to Roman authority. The cult's success lay in this very flexibility. For a Greek, it was a familiar honor paid to a benefactor. For a Gaul, it was a political necessity. For a Roman soldier on the German frontier, swearing an oath by the emperor's genius was an act of patriotism. It created a common religious language for an empire of incredible diversity. Yet this very policy of enforced unity would soon create an irreconcilable conflict with a small, stubborn sect from Judea that refused to burn a pinch of incense before the emperor's statue, a simple act that came to define the ultimate test of faith. While the imperial cult demanded public loyalty, another, far more peculiar faith was being fabricated in a small coastal town. In the 2nd century, a charismatic prophet named Alexander of Abonotichus unveiled a new god, Glycon, a serpent deity with a human-like head of flowing hair. Alexander claimed this was a rebirth of the healing god Asclepius, but the entire cult was an elaborate and brilliant hoax. The centerpiece was the god himself, a large snake. Alexander would present Glycon to awestruck crowds, the serpent's head nuzzling his cheek as if whispering divine secrets. What the worshippers did not know was that they were witnessing a sophisticated puppet. The real snake was docile, its head kept hidden within its coils, while a fabricated puppet head, operated by thin horsehair strings from the darkness, would emerge to move its mouth and perform miracles. Alexander's genius lay in his showmanship and his understanding of human desire. He established a lucrative oracle, accepting written questions on sealed scrolls. His team would secretly open them, craft clever, ambiguous answers, and then reseal the scrolls. In the public ceremony, Glycon would miraculously unroll them and deliver the replies, leaving the petitioners convinced of the god's direct power. Despite being exposed by the skeptical writer Lucian, the cult of Glycon thrived, a testament to the profound human need to believe in the miraculous, even when it is manufactured. From a fabricated serpent god, we journey to the very real and ancient mysteries of the Kabiri on the windswept island of Samothrace. Long before the great philosophers of Athens, this remote island was a major pilgrimage site, its secrets guarded so closely that we know even less about them than we do of elusives. The Kabiri were a group of chthonic or underworld deities of immense power. They were primarily known as the great protectors of those who braved the sea. For any ancient sailor setting out across the treacherous Aegean, initiation into the mysteries of the Kabiri was a form of divine insurance, believed to grant safe passage through the most violent storms. The initiation was a powerful, tiered experience. Candidates, known as Mistai, underwent a preliminary purification ceremony, perhaps involving sacrifices and ritual dances. The highest level of initiation, the epopteia, was reserved for those who proved worthy. It was here, in the heart of the sanctuary, that the most sacred objects were revealed. While their exact nature is lost, archaeologists believe they may have included powerful aniconic symbols, objects that represented the gods without depicting them in human form, focusing the initiate's mind on the raw, abstract power of the divine. The cult's prestige was immense. Famous historical figures like Philip II of Macedon and the Egyptian queen Arsinoe II were initiates, seeking the favor of these powerful gods. The mysteries of the Kabiri offered not a detailed map of the afterlife, but a more immediate and practical promise, the tangible protection of unpredictable elemental forces. This search for protection through grueling ritual finds its ultimate expression back in the arms of the Great Mother. The cult of Attis revolved around the tragic myth of Cybele's mortal lover, a story of divine passion, madness, and self-destruction. Attis was a beautiful shepherd youth who, in a fit of divinely inspired insanity, castrated himself under a pine tree, bleeding to death as a testament to his uncontrollable devotion. This violent act of self-sacrifice became the central focus of his worship, reenacted each spring during the festival of the Hilaria. The rituals began with a day of somber mourning, as followers commemorated the death of Attis with funeral dirges and a procession carrying a sacred pine tree, symbolizing the tree he died beneath. This grief then built towards its shocking climax on the Day of Blood. In a frenzied public ceremony, new galley priests and fervent devotees would work themselves into an ecstatic state with wild music and dancing. Then, in a symbolic reenactment of Attis's own act, they would take flints or sharpened stones and castrate themselves, offering their severed flesh to the goddess as the ultimate sacrifice. How could such a violent act be seen as a path to salvation? For the initiates, this was not mere mutilation, but a transcendent surrender of their mortal, physical nature to become wholly possessed by the divine. It was the most extreme form of devotion imaginable, a bloody baptism that promised a new, sacred identity, forever set apart in the service of the Mother of the Gods. A single tragic event on the Nile River gave birth to an entire religion. In the year 130, the Roman Emperor Hadrian's young companion, the Bithynian youth Antinous, drowned under mysterious circumstances. The emperor's grief was not private, it was imperial, and it was transformative. Hadrian, one of the most powerful men in the world, used that power to deify his lost love, creating the cult of Antinous almost overnight. This was not a slow, organic growth of belief, but a top-down imposition of divinity born from profound personal sorrow. Hadrian founded an entire city, Antinopolis, on the very bank of the Nile where the youth had died, a permanent stone and mortar memorial that also served as the cult's epicenter. He endowed it with grand temples and established sacred games in his honor, rivaling the great Olympic competitions. Priests were appointed, and the worship of this new god spread rapidly across the empire, fueled by imperial decree and genuine popular fascination. But who was Antinous as a god? His worship was profoundly syncretic, a mirror reflecting the complex religious landscape of the empire. In his death by drowning, he was immediately identified with Osiris, the Egyptian lord of the underworld who was also slain and reborn through the Nile's waters. His youthful beauty and tragic end linked him to Dionysus, the god of ecstatic release. To others, he was a hunter god like Apollo or a gentle shepherd like Aristeas. He became a blank slate upon which different cultures could project their own ideals of the divine, a universal symbol of beautiful, sacrificed youth. This is why his face is one of the most recognizable from the ancient world. More sculptures survive of Antinous than of almost any other figure from the era. Walk through the halls of the Vatican or the Louvre, and you will see him again and again, that distinct, brooding, idealized visage with the full lips, the heavy-lidded eyes, and the characteristic knot of hair over his brow. These were not simple portraits, they were objects of veneration, depicting the mortal youth as a god, often holding the attributes of the deities he embodied. How does a personal tragedy become a state religion? The cult of Antinous stands as a unique testament to the power of love, grief, and absolute imperial authority to shape the divine itself, leaving behind a marble ghost that haunts our museums to this day. High on a hilltop in ancient Syria, a different kind of sky god was worshipped, one whose power was forged in iron. This was Jupiter Dolicinus, a deity who began as a local weather god in the small town of Dolic, but was destined to become a divine companion to the Roman legions. His home was a mountain sanctuary, a place rich with deposits of iron ore, and this connection to metal and the earth's raw materials shaped his very identity. He was depicted as a powerful, bearded figure standing firm upon the back of a bull, a symbol of unshakable strength. In one hand he brandished a thunderbolt claiming the authority of the sky itself, and in the other he held a double-headed axe, the labris, an instrument of both sacrifice and supreme power. It was this potent combination of celestial might and earthly, martial strength that made his cult so appealing to the professional soldiers of Rome. As the legions marched, they carried the worship of Jupiter Dolicinus with them, from the sun-baked deserts of North Africa to the rain-swept walls of Hadrian in Britain. Wherever a unit was stationed, especially in those lonely frontier forts, they would build a temple, a Dolichineum, as a spiritual fortress. These were not grand public temples, but intimate, club-like sanctuaries for a brotherhood of soldiers. The artifacts left behind in these sacred spaces tell a vivid story of their devotion. Archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of small bronze plaques, each one a votive offering from a soldier seeking the god's favor. These plaques repeatedly show the god in his classic pose, a constant metallic reminder of his power. Often he is accompanied by his consort, Juno Dolicina, who stands upon a hind, a female deer, linking her to the wild, untamed nature of the forest. What was it about this specific god that resonated so deeply with men at the edge of the empire? He offered a familiar divine hierarchy, a king and queen of heaven that mirrored the Roman Jupiter and Juno, but with a raw frontier edge. He was a god of order and victory, but also a god deeply connected to the very iron from which their swords and armor were made. In a world of uncertainty and constant peril, the solid, metallic presence of Jupiter Dolicinus standing upon his bull must have felt like a promise, a guarantee of steadfast protection from the chaos that lay beyond the camp's gates. Every spring, a spectacle of controlled chaos descended upon Rome. The sacred stone of the Great Mother was placed upon a ceremonial wagon drawn by oxen, and a procession of her galley priests clad in bright, effeminate robes and chanting in their foreign tongue would lead it out of the city. Their destination was the small, cold stream of the river Almo. There, the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome's state religion, would perform the levatio, the ritual washing of the black stone. This was a profound moment of contradiction. The highest representative of Roman religious order was meticulously cleansing the very symbol of a faith that represented everything his culture feared: ecstatic disorder and the surrender of reason. The state had officially invited the goddess for her power, but it kept her wildness at arm's length, contained within a formal Roman ritual. This tension exploded just days later during the Day of Blood, the Sanguinum. While the levatio was a public state ceremony, the Sanguinum was a private, frenzied affair for the devoted. Inside the temple precinct on the Palatine Hill, the galley and other initiates would work themselves into a state of divine madness with wild, percussive music, whirling dances, and flailing their long hair. In the heat of this ecstatic trance, they would take flints or sharpened blades and, in a bloody reenactment of Attis's castration, gash their own arms, spattering the altar and the sacred stone with their blood as a personal offering to the goddess. The Roman state's response to this fervor was a masterpiece of political and religious engineering. While the cult itself was legal and its public festivals state-funded, Roman law drew a stark, discriminatory line. No Roman citizen was permitted to become a gallus. The act of self-mutilation, that ultimate act of devotion, was legally classified as a form of self-murder and was grounds for the loss of citizenship. The message was unmistakable. The power of the Great Mother was welcome within the borders, but the passionate, Eastern fervor that came with her was a contagion that could not be allowed to infect the Roman body politic. The cult was a spiritual tool, vital for the empire's protection, but too dangerous for its own citizens to wield fully. How do you harness a storm without being destroyed by it? The Romans tried to do just that, building a sacred cage for a goddess whose very nature was to be wild and free. Descend the worn stone steps beneath the Basilica of San Clement in Rome, and you leave the familiar world of Christianity far above. The air grows cool and heavy. You enter a long, narrow chamber, its low vaulted ceiling pressing down, deliberately constructed to feel like the sacred cave of Mithras himself. Faint torchlight would have once flickered across the walls, now bare, but your eyes are drawn to the centerpiece, the magnificent marble relief of the Tauroctony. Here is Mithras, his face serene, performing the central, saving act, the bull's lifeblood spilling forth as the dog and snake lap at the wound, and the scorpion clutches the animal's genitals. This is not just art, it is a frozen theological argument, a star chart carved in stone waiting to be decoded by the initiated. Every element in this scene corresponds to a constellation. The bull is Taurus, the dog is Canis Minor, the scorpion is Scorpio. The entire tableau represents a specific alignment of the heavens, a celestial map of the soul's journey. To stand in this Mithraeum is to feel the weight of its secrecy, to understand that salvation here was not a matter of simple faith, but of esoteric knowledge earned through rigorous trials. Archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of these sanctuaries, from the deserts of Syria to the damp frontier of Britain, almost always in underground or subterranean spaces, and almost always near military forts. The artifacts left behind are telling: small altars dedicated by centurions, inscriptions from soldiers who achieved the rank of father, the cult's highest grade. The physical evidence paints a clear picture. This was a soldier's religion, a spiritual brotherhood that mirrored the legion's own discipline and hierarchy. Yet for all this evidence, the cult's origins remain one of antiquity's great puzzles. Was Mithras the ancient Persian god Mithra, a deity of contracts and light, brought west by legionaries who served in the east? Or was he an entirely new creation, a Roman god born from the intense astrological speculations of the 1st century before Christ? His story and symbolism crafted as a complex allegory for the soul's struggle against cosmic forces. Scholars are fiercely divided. The name is Persian, but the intricate astrological symbolism feels uniquely Roman, a product of its time. Perhaps the most compelling theory is that Mithraism was a brilliant syncretism, taking the name and a few traits of the Persian god and weaving them into a Chinese letter, potent mystery religion designed to answer the spiritual needs of the Roman military man. So why did this powerful, widespread cult vanish? It possessed everything needed for success: a clear structure, a promise of salvation, and the allegiance of the empire's most powerful institution, the army. Its downfall was not a failure of doctrine, but a matter of access. Mithraism was exclusive, a boys' club for soldiers and merchants, shut off to women and civilians. When the Emperor Constantine threw his support behind Christianity, he backed a faith that offered a similar promise of eternal life, but to everyone, slave and free, man and woman, soldier and senator. The hidden Mithraea, for all their powerful brotherhood, could not compete with a church that opened its doors to the entire empire. The underground chambers were sealed, their starry secrets buried, until their silent stones were unearthed centuries later, whispering of a salvation reserved only for a chosen few. Rome had never seen a high priest like the Emperor Elagabalus. He was a 14-year-old boy from Syria when he ascended the throne, and he brought his god with him, a deity so alien it would shake the foundations of Roman state religion. This was not the familiar sun god Sol, but Elagabal, a powerful, aniconic sun god from the city of Emesa, worshipped in the form of a large, black, conical meteorite, a betyl stone believed to have fallen from the heavens. To the Roman mind, this was not a proper god at all, but a crude, foreign rock. Yet the young emperor who took his name from this deity was its hereditary high priest, and he was determined to make it the supreme god of the entire empire. He built a lavish new temple on the Palatine Hill, the Elagabalium, and had the sacred stone transported from Syria with immense ceremony, placing it in a chariot drawn by a team of spotless white horses. Elagabalus himself, dressed in lavish Syrian priestly robes with heavy makeup and jewels, danced in ecstasy before the stone as it was paraded through the streets, a spectacle that both fascinated and horrified the Roman populace. His religious vision was absolute and radical. He declared that all other gods, including Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the king of the Roman pantheon, were merely servants to his sun god. He even gathered the most sacred relics of various Roman cults, the Palladium of Athens, the shield of Mars, the fire of Vesta, and moved them into the Elagabalium, forcing them to become attendants to his black stone. The most shocking act, however, was a divine marriage meant to unite the new solar religion with the oldest traditions of Rome. Elagabalus arranged for the betyl of Elagabal to be ritually wed to the cult statue of the Vestal Virgin, a goddess named Tanit whom he imported from Carthage. The Vestal Virgins themselves were the most sacred priestesses in Rome, sworn to absolute chastity on pain of death, and their cult was the very bedrock of the state's religious and social order. To see their goddess married off to a foreign stone was an unimaginable sacrilege. This was not mere syncretism, it was a theological coup. The Roman elite and the common people alike saw this as the destruction of their world, a deliberate dismantling of the pact between Rome and its gods that had ensured the empire's prosperity for centuries. The teenage emperor's religious extremism, combined with his personal scandals and flagrant disregard for tradition, made his rule untenable. After just 4 years, he and his mother were ambushed by the Praetorian Guard, murdered, and their bodies dragged through the streets and thrown into the Tiber River. The Senate then enacted a damnatio memoriae, a decree to erase all memory of him. His name was chiseled from public inscriptions, his portraits defaced, and the black stone of Elagabal was unceremoniously sent back to Syria. The cult of Elagabalus stands as a stark lesson in the limits of imperial power, proving that even a Roman emperor could not force a new god down the throats of a people who believed their entire civilization depended on the old ones. Thrace, the rugged land north of Greece, sent more than just fierce mercenaries south. It exported its wild goddesses, and Athens, for all its philosophy and order, could not resist their call. The first to arrive was Bendis, a huntress deity akin to Artemis, but with a distinctly Thracian character. Her official introduction to the city was a momentous occasion, so significant that Plato himself used it as the opening scene for his republic. The Athenian state, in a rare move, fully sanctioned her cult and established a spectacular annual festival in her honor. The highlight was a torchlight race on horseback, a breathtaking spectacle where riders, bearing flaming torches, would thunder from the city center to her sanctuary at the Piraeus harbor. As dusk fell, the celebrations would transform into an all-night revel, a paniches where citizens, metics, and even slaves could mingle freely under the stars, watching theatrical performances and sharing in a collective, state-sponsored ecstasy. This official welcome for a foreign goddess reveals a surprising flexibility in Athenian religion, a willingness to incorporate a new divine power and channel its energy into a vibrant public celebration. But the Thracian religious spirit had another, far less orderly face. Where Bendis was a huntress welcomed with public games, her counterpart Cotys was a goddess of the wild mountains and uninhibited revelry. Her rites were not for the civic square but for the shadows, known for their raw, ecstatic, and deeply transgressive nature. Her followers, primarily women, would retreat to the wilderness for nocturnal ceremonies. There, they would work themselves into a frenzy with relentless, percussive music from drums and bronze bells, their wild dances meant to summon the goddess herself. The rituals of Cotys were so notorious for their licentiousness that they became a byword for debauchery. Centuries later, Roman writers would use the phrase "worse than the worshippers of Cotito" as an ultimate insult, implying a level of shameless behavior that defied all social norms. For these women, the cult of Cotys offered a temporary but total inversion of their daily lives. It was a sacred space to cast off the constraints of a patriarchal society, to become possessed by the divine, and to express a primal, chaotic power that had no place in the civilized world of the city. How could the same culture that produced the logical dialogues of Plato also embrace the untamed, nocturnal screams of the Cotys devotees? The answer lies in the understanding that the human spirit requires both light and shadow, and the gods themselves could wear many masks. The line between myth and ritual could blur entirely in the service of the Great Mother. While the galley reenacted the tragedy of Attis, another group of devotees embodied the mythic protectors of her infant son, Zeus himself. These were the Corybantes, armed, dancing demons whose worship was a form of ecstatic medicine. According to the myth, when the goddess Re gave birth to Zeus, she hid him in a Cretan cave to protect him from his father, Cronus, who devoured his children. To conceal the infant's cries, the Corybantes, often described as her own sons, danced a furious, clattering war dance around him, beating their spears against their shields with an overwhelming cacophony. This primal, protective frenzy became the template for a real-world ecstatic cult. Followers of the Corybantes sought to replicate this divine uproar. Their rituals were intense, immersive sensory experiences. Participants would gather, often in secluded outdoor spaces, and begin to dance to the relentless, driving rhythm of drums and the sharp clash of bronze cymbals. The music was not meant to be melodic but overwhelming, a wall of sound designed to shatter ordinary consciousness. The dancers would move with increasing abandon, their bodies becoming instruments of the rhythm until they crossed a threshold into a trance-like state known as Corybantism. In this altered state, they were no longer merely human. They were the mythical guardians themselves, channeling the very energy that once saved the king of the gods. But this frenzy had a surprising purpose: healing. Ancient sources suggest that these rites were sought as a cure for mental and emotional disturbances, particularly a state of intense melancholy or frantic anxiety. The theory was one of sympathetic resonance that a disordered soul, a kind of inner madness, could be cured by a greater, divinely ordained madness from the outside. The overwhelming rhythm and ecstatic dance would shake the sufferer's psyche to its core, driving out the pathological turmoil and replacing it with a purified, cathartic exhaustion. Can you envision it, a person gripped by a deep despair, entering the circle of dancers and surrendering to the thunderous noise and movement, not to find peace, but to find a more powerful chaos that could scour their inner darkness clean? This practice blurs our modern distinction between therapy and religion, suggesting that the ancients saw spiritual and psychological well-being as inseparable. Were the Corybantes real priests, or were they simply mythic figures invoked in ritual? The answer is both. For the initiate in the throes of the dance, the myth became present and immediate. They were not reenacting a story, they were living it, their own inner turmoil mirrored in the frantic protection of the divine infant, their catharsis found in the glorious, deafening noise that kept the devourer at bay. The wild, clattering dance of the Corybantes was a cure for the individual soul, but the Roman Empire itself was suffering from a collective madness of civil war and economic collapse. A century after the teenage Elagabalus failed to impose his sun god, another emperor tried again, this time with a deity designed not to shock but to unite. This was Deus Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, and his rise was a direct response to the empire's crisis. In the tumultuous years of the 3rd century, Rome was fracturing, with 20 different emperators rising and falling in just 50 years, many assassinated by their own troops. The empire needed a symbol of stability and eternal power, and the Emperor Aurelian found it not in a foreign rock, but in the one constant visible to every citizen from Britain to Syria, the sun itself. After a series of decisive military victories that reunified the shattered empire, Aurelian officially established the cult of Sol Invictus as a state religion in 274. He built a magnificent new temple for the god in Rome, staffed by a new college of pontiffs, and funded its operations with a portion of the empire's tax revenue. This was not the old agricultural sun god Sol, but a new imperial sun, a supreme, singular celestial emperor. Sol Invictus was depicted as a powerful, radiant figure, often driving a chariot, his image stamped on coins that circulated to the farthest provinces, a daily reminder of a single, unifying power overseeing the entire Roman world. This organized, monotheistic-like cult was a brilliant political and spiritual solution. It offered a common divine figure that could be embraced by legionaries of Mithras, philosophers who saw the sun as the highest expression of Plato's good, and ordinary citizens who simply recognized the sun's life-giving power. It provided a theological backbone for the idea of a single, indivisible empire under one ruler and one supreme god. Aurelian even established games in the god's honor, held every 4 years to further cement this new civic religion. The most enduring legacy of this state cult, however, lies in a date on our modern calendar. The Romans celebrated the birthday of Sol Invictus on December 25th. This was the winter solstice on the old Julian calendar, the day the sun visibly began its return, unconquered by the creeping darkness. It was a festival of light, hope, and rebirth. Decades later, when Roman emperors converted to Christianity, they faced a problem. The Bible never specifies the date of Jesus' birth, but the popular festival of the unconquered sun was deeply entrenched. How do you convert a population attached to its holidays? The Church made a strategic decision. In the 4th century, it officially designated December 25th as the Feast of the Nativity. The symbolism was perfect. Christ, the light of the world, was seen as the true sun conquering the darkness of sin. The old rituals of light and celebration were given a new Christian meaning. The state-sponsored cult of Sol Invictus, designed to save the empire, ultimately provided the very date for its greatest rival's most beloved celebration, a silent victory in the long war for the Roman soul. High on the rocky plains of Anatolia, another celestial power commanded devotion under the night sky. The cult of men venerated a mysterious lunar god, a stark contrast to the solar deities dominating the Roman world. Men was instantly recognizable in his carved depictions, a youthful figure wearing the soft Phrygian cap, his shoulders framed by the elegant curve of a crescent moon. This was no distant, abstract force, but a god intimately connected to the rhythms of the earth and the fate of the soul. His divine authority spanned the cycle of life itself, from the fertility of the soil and the womb to the final journey into the afterlife. The moon's constant cycle of waxing and waning made him a natural symbol of rebirth and renewal, a celestial body that died and was resurrected every single month. His power over the monthly cycle also linked him to the health and fertility of women, making him a patron for those seeking children or protection in childbirth. But his gaze was not always benevolent. His sanctuaries, often carved directly into remote mountain cliffs, were places of potent and sometimes fearful petition. The archaeological remains tell a dual story of hope and dread. Worshippers left behind carved reliefs showing the god standing proudly, sometimes accompanied by a bull or an eagle, symbols of his strength and celestial reach. Yet alongside these reverent images, archaeologists have unearthed something far darker: lead curse tablets. These thin sheets of metal, inscribed with tiny, frantic writing, were rolled or pierced with nails and left in the god's sacred precinct. They called upon men to act as a divine enforcer, to punish those who had broken oaths, stolen property, or betrayed a trust. A farmer might curse a neighbor who stole his livestock, or a merchant might call upon the god to inflict illness on a business partner who cheated him. This was the god's shadow side. The moon that illuminated the night could also reveal hidden crimes, and his otherworldly power could be harnessed to bring terrible justice down upon wrongdoers. How does a god of fertility and new life also become a divine avenger? For his followers, it was a matter of cosmic balance. The same lunar force that governed growth and creation also governed fate and consequence. Men watched over every oath, and his dark, rocky sanctuaries stood as silent, powerful witnesses to the promises and betrayals of everyday life. A goddess of love could command more than just desire. In the city of Corinth, high on the Acrocorinth, stood the temple of Aphrodite Aurania, the celestial Aphrodite. She was not merely a goddess of physical attraction, but a universal, cosmic force, a power of generation that bound the heavens and the earth together. Her worship was a far cry from simple romance. It involved ecstatic rites, a spiritual intoxication meant to elevate the soul towards the divine. It was here that the famous hierodules, her sacred servants, practiced a form of temple prostitution, not as mere commerce, but as a powerful act of devotion. For a pilgrim to lie with a hierodule was to engage in a sacred ritual, a physical union that was believed to channel the goddess's own creative, unifying power, bringing the worshipper into direct contact with the celestial force of love itself. Far to the east, another goddess ruled with a strange and terrifying majesty. The Syrian goddess Atargotes was a being of profound contradiction, a deity of fertility and the life-giving waters who was also a voracious consumer of blood. Her most famous temple was at Hierapolis, a site of such bizarre spectacle that it became a pilgrimage destination for the entire Near East. The temple complex was a world of its own, centered around a sacred pond teeming with fish. These creatures were not for eating. They were revered as the goddess's sacred children, and to harm one was a capital offense. Pilgrims would bring offerings of small gold and silver fish to cast into the water, a shimmering tribute to the life she governed. Yet this serene scene of aquatic devotion was violently counterpointed by the rites of her priests. During her frenzied festivals, these men would work themselves into a state of divine madness, slashing their own arms and backs with knives. They would then take this offering of their own blood and splatter it upon her altar, a stark, personal sacrifice to satisfy the thirst of the mother of all life. Back in the heart of Rome, a different kind of thirst was honored, one for victory and raw, untamed war. This was the domain of Bellona, a goddess whose very name was a battle cry. Her temple was not within the sacred boundary of the city, but outside its walls, a place where the formalities of Roman state religion could be set aside for the brutal realities of conflict. It was here that the Senate would meet to receive generals returning from campaigns, and here that declarations of war were formally made. Her priests, the Bellonarii, were her shock troops of devotion. In their public rituals, they would embody the fury of the battlefield, whipping themselves into a frenzy with blaring trumpets and wild dances. They would draw blades and gash their own arms and thighs, catching the blood in their shields or letting it spill upon the ground as a gruesome libation to their goddess. This was not a private act of despair, but a public, calculated offering of life force to fuel the destruction of Rome's enemies. How could such violence be sacred? For the Romans, Bellona's bloodletting was a necessary magic, a way to channel the chaos of war into a ritual that, in their minds, ensured that the blood spilled would be that of their foes and not their own. While the legions worshipped gods of war and emperors demanded divine honors, the true heart of Roman spirituality beat not in grand temples but in the quiet of the home. This was the foundational, everyday devotion of the cult of the Lares and Penates, a personal religion that connected every Roman family directly to the divine. The Lares were the guardian spirits of the place. Each household had its own La Familiaris, a protective spirit of the family and its land, believed to be the deified ancestor watching over his descendants. They were also the guardians of crossroads, the Lares Compitales, who watched over the community. The Penates were different, yet equally essential. These were the gods of the storeroom, the Penas, the protectors of the family's food supply, wine and oil. Their favor meant a full larder and prosperity. Their displeasure could bring want and hunger. Together, these spirits were worshipped daily at a small, beautifully decorated shrine called the Lararium. This was not a piece of furniture, but a sacred microcosm of the home, often a niche in the wall or a small cabinet, sometimes even a miniature temple structure. Inside, you would find statuettes of the Lares, typically depicted as youthful, dancing figures holding a drinking horn and a bowl. The rituals performed here were simple, profound, and woven into the fabric of daily life. At every family meal, a small portion of food was offered to the Lares, thrown into the hearth fire as a shared sacrifice. Major family events, a birth, a marriage, a departure on a journey, all required an offering at the Lararium. The father of the family, the paterfamilias, acted as the priest, leading the family in these devotions. This was a religion of gratitude and reciprocity, a continuous conversation with the spirits who ensured the family's health and continuity. How could such a quiet, domestic practice be the bedrock of a vast empire's spiritual life? The Roman state was seen as merely the family writ large. The sacred fire of Vesta was the public hearth of Rome. The penates of the Roman people were kept in the temple of Vesta, their safety synonymous with the safety of the state itself. The domestic cult taught piety, duty, and respect for tradition from the earliest age. A child who learned to honor the Lares of their home would grow into a citizen who understood the importance of honoring the gods of Rome. It was a spiritual education in miniature, ensuring that the bonds of family and the favor of the gods remained unbroken for generations. In the end, the most powerful forces in the Roman world were not always the distant, imposing gods of Olympus, but the intimate, watchful spirits of the hearth and the storeroom. While the Roman hearth honored household spirits, thousands sought a far more personal miracle at the sanctuaries of Asclepius, the god of medicine. This was not a cult of fear or frenzy, but one of desperate hope and quiet healing. Unlike the dramatic demands of other deities, Asclepius offered a tangible promise, relief from the physical suffering that defined so much of ancient life. His temples, called Asclepia, were more than places of prayer. They were the hospitals of the ancient world, blending profound faith with practical, therapeutic care. The most famous of these was at Epidaurus, a sprawling sanctuary set in a peaceful green valley, a place deliberately chosen for its clean air and serene environment. Pilgrims would travel for days, even weeks, to reach this sacred ground, often after every human doctor had failed them. They came bearing afflictions of every kind, from blindness and lameness to chronic pain and mysterious illnesses. Their first steps involved a period of purification, bathing in sacred springs and adopting a simple, prescribed diet to prepare their bodies and minds for what was to come. The heart of the healing ritual was a practice known as incubation. As dusk fell, the supplicants would be led into a special hall called the abaton, a long, stoa-like building that was strictly off-limits during the day. Here, in the sacred darkness, they would lie on simple pallets, their minds focused on the god, and fall asleep. They believed that in their dreams, Asclepius himself would visit them. The god might appear as a kindly, bearded man, sometimes accompanied by his daughter Hygeia, the personification of health, or by his sacred serpents. The divine visitation could take many forms. For some, the god would simply touch the afflicted part of their body, and they would awaken cured. For others, he would perform a startling dream surgery, cutting them open, removing the sickness, and stitching them back together, leaving no scar. One surviving inscription tells of a man with a paralyzed finger who dreamed the god simply bent it back into place until it was whole. Another describes a woman who had been pregnant for 5 years, dreaming the god opened her womb and handed her a fully grown son. Upon waking, the evidence of the miracle was left behind for all to see, the terracotta models of the healed body parts. The sanctuary at Epidaurus is filled with these poignant offerings, a vast collection of molded arms, legs, eyes, ears, and internal organs, each one a silent testimony to a prayer answered. A pilgrim cured of a leg wound would leave a clay leg. A woman who could now bear children might leave a votive uterus. These artifacts were more than just thank you notes. They were powerful propaganda, physical proof of the god's power that encouraged ever more pilgrims to make the journey. Yet the healing at an Asclepion was not solely supernatural. The temple priests understood the connection between the mind and body. The regimen included prescribed exercises, therapeutic baths, and a focus on good hygiene. Patients were encouraged to watch theatrical performances in Epidaurus's famous theater, believing that the emotional catharsis of tragedy was itself a form of medicine. The entire experience was a holistic treatment, a carefully managed environment designed to reduce stress, inspire hope, and activate the body's own powerful capacity to heal. The cult of Asclepius reveals a profound truth about ancient spirituality. The line between divine miracle and practical medicine was not a wall, but a doorway, and for countless pilgrims, walking through it was the only way back to health. These Asclepia were places of living hope, but the dead too could hold a sacred power all their own. Across the Greek world, the tombs of legendary figures became sites of intense local worship, a practice we call the hero cult. This was not the worship of the distant, all-powerful Olympian gods, but something far more intimate and human. A hero was a semi-divine being, a man or woman who had lived an extraordinary life, perhaps a great warrior like Achilles, a founder of a city, or a figure of immense wisdom. In death, their powerful spirit was believed to remain active, anchored to their physical tomb. A community would establish a shrine directly over what they believed to be the hero's burial place. The rituals performed there were fundamentally different from those for the gods of Olympus. When sacrificing to Zeus or Athena, you offered a prized animal like a white ox, burning the bones and fat for the gods to enjoy as savory smoke, while the worshippers feasted on the meat. But for a hero, the sacrifice was often a holocaust, a complete burning of the entire animal. The offering was given over to the hero entirely, with no meat shared among the people, a ritual of total surrender. Libations were poured directly down into the earth, into a tube leading to the tomb, a direct channel to the chthonic or underworld power of the revered dead. Why would a city pour such precious resources into the grave of a long-dead figure? The hero cult was a bridge to the past, a way for a community to claim a tangible connection to its own legendary origins. The city of Thebes worshipped Heracles, claiming him as their native son. Athens venerated Theseus, the king who unified Attica, and his supposed bones were even brought back to the city in a grand ceremony to bolster civic pride. These were not just stories, they were active spiritual relationships. A farmer might pray to a local hero for protection over his fields. A woman seeking children might leave a small offering at a hero's tomb. The hero's spirit, having known human struggle, was thought to be more accessible, more sympathetic to the everyday pleas of the people. They were powerful neighbors who could intercede with the higher gods, protect the city from harm, and bless the land with fertility. In a very real sense, these cults turned history into a living force, ensuring that the great deeds of the past continued to shape and protect the present. The desire to speak with the dead led pilgrims to a place of profound dread, the oracle of the dead at Ephyra. Known as the Nekaiomanteion, this was not a temple for the living, but a grim portal to the underworld, a place where the veil between worlds was believed to be at its thinnest. Here, those haunted by loss sought answers from the silent shades of the departed. The journey itself was a test of will. A pilgrim would not simply arrive and ask a question. They first had to undergo a long and grueling period of preparation, often lasting for weeks. This involved strict dietary restrictions, ritual purifications, and complete isolation from the outside world. The goal was to weaken the body and sharpen the mind, to make the soul more receptive to the chilling whispers of the dead. The architecture of the sanctuary was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, designed from the ground up to convince visitors they were truly crossing into Hades. The central chamber was a massive, windowless hall, a labyrinth of supporting pillars that created confusing shadows and echoes in the flickering torchlight. Beneath the stone floor lay a complex network of hidden corridors and chambers, allowing priests to move unseen. They could project ghostly voices, make statues seem to move, or create sudden, unearthly noises that seemed to come from the very walls. A pilgrim, already disoriented from days of fasting and solitude, would be led through this terrifying maze in near total darkness. The air was heavy with the smell of burning incense and strange, hallucinogenic substances smoldering on hidden braziers. After this harrowing journey, the seeker would finally be positioned before a great bronze gate, the symbolic entrance to the land of the dead. In this state of heightened fear and sensory deprivation, the carefully staged illusions became terrifyingly real. A loved one's voice might echo from the darkness. A spectral figure could emerge from the shadows. The experience was so convincing that those who emerged believed, without a doubt, that they had stood at the threshold of the afterlife and received a message from beyond the grave. The Nekaiomanteion was a sacred theater of fear, where the deepest human longing for one last conversation was met with a chilling, manufactured reality. Even the gods could die with the summer heat. The cult of Adonis brought this stark reality into the very homes of Athenian women. Adonis was a Phoenician import, a beautiful youth loved by the goddess Aphrodite, whose life was cut short by a wild boar. His myth was a poignant allegory for the brief, brilliant life of spring flowers and the scorching death they met under the summer sun. This cycle of beauty and decay was not marked by grand state ceremonies, but by the intimate, sorrowful rites of women during the Adonia festival. High on the rooftops of the city, they would gather to mourn. Their central ritual was the creation of the gardens of Adonis. They would fill broken shards of pottery, baskets, and other shallow containers with fast-sprouting seeds like lettuce and fennel. These were not the sturdy crops of the farmer's field, planted deep in fertile earth for a long harvest. These were gardens of instant, fleeting beauty. The women would tend them for just 8 days, watching the plants shoot up in the intense heat, only to wither and die almost immediately. They would then weep over these miniature, dying landscapes, tearing their hair and singing laments for the slain Adonis before casting the pots and the dead plants into the sea or a spring. It was a powerful, female-centered expression of grief for the transience of life and love, a brief, public outlet for emotions often kept private in the ancient world. Far to the east, in the sun-baked lands of Mesopotamia, a similar divine tragedy unfolded each year. This was the cult of Tammuz, one of the world's oldest dying and rising gods. Tammuz was a shepherd god, the consort of the great goddess Ishtar. His death, symbolized by his annual descent into the underworld, was a cataclysm that caused all fertility to cease on earth. The world grew barren and lifeless without him. His worship was defined by loud, public lamentation. For an entire month named in his honor, professional female mourners would lead the people in dirges and wailing. The biblical book of Ezekiel offers a fleeting glimpse of this practice, mentioning women sitting at the north gate of the temple in Jerusalem, weeping for Tammuz. The rituals were a form of sympathetic magic, a desperate attempt to persuade the goddess Ishtar to journey into the underworld and rescue her beloved, thereby restoring life to the world. When the god was believed to return, the lamentations turned to celebration, marking the return of the rains and the renewal of the land. Both Adonis and Tammuz represent a profound and universal human recognition that life is inseparable from death, and that the bounty of the earth is a fragile gift, lost and regained in an endless sacred dance. Why did these stories of dying gods resonate so deeply across so many cultures? They gave a divine face to the most basic human anxieties about food, the seasons, and survival itself, transforming the terrifying cycle of nature into a story one could mourn and then miraculously celebrate. Yet the most powerful deities were not always those of the distant heavens, but the ones who promised a full purse and a bountiful harvest. In the marketplaces and farmlands of Roman Gaul and Britain, the cult of the Gallic Rosmata offered just that. Rosmata was a native Celtic goddess of abundance, fertility, and, most importantly, of worldly prosperity. Her very name is thought to mean the great provider, and she was the divine force behind a successful business deal, a fertile field, and the general good fortune that made daily life secure. She was so essential to the Celtic worldview that when the Romans arrived, they did not erase her. Instead, they performed a fascinating act of religious fusion, pairing her with their own god of commerce, Mercury. On countless stone altars and statues found from France to the English borders, we see them standing side by side, a divine power couple of prosperity. Mercury, the swift messenger of the gods, holds his signature caduceus, the staff entwined with serpents, and right beside him stands Rosmata, her own symbol speaking volumes. She is most often shown holding a cornucopia, the horn of plenty overflowing with fruits, a universal symbol of the earth's generosity. But just as frequently, she carries a large, distinctive purse, a practical representation of financial wealth and the rewards of trade. Sometimes she even holds a patera, a shallow dish used for pouring libations, showing her active role in the sacred rites that ensured this continued abundance. What does this partnership tell us? It was more than just a convenient pairing of similar gods. It was a spiritual compromise that allowed two cultures to coexist. For a Roman merchant in the town of Lugdunum, he saw the familiar Mercury alongside a local goddess who clearly held great sway. For a native Gaulish farmer, he could still honor his beloved provider, now standing with equal status next to the new Roman god. This was the genius of syncretism. It built bridges of belief. The worship of Rosmata was not a grand, state-sponsored mystery, but a faith of the people, etched into the stone of a shopkeeper's votive altar or carved into the lintel of a prosperous farmhouse. Her cult reminds us that for most people in the ancient world, the greatest miracle was not a vision of the afterlife, but the simple, profound blessing of having enough. But the god of the underground soldier had a much older, more public life long before he ever reached Rome. The original Mithra, known in the ancient Avestan texts as Mithra, was a central figure in the Persian religious world, a divine force of immense power and moral clarity. He was not a secretive god of caves, but a god of the open sky, a lord of light and truth. In the Zoroastrian faith, he served as a divine judge, the unwavering guardian of covenant and contract. His very name was thought to be linked to the word for contract, and his primary role was to witness all oaths and agreements, from treaties between kings to promises between neighbors. To break a word sworn in the name of Mithra was to invite his terrible, swift judgment. He was the enemy of the lie, the cosmic force of falsehood and chaos, and he battled tirelessly alongside the supreme god Ahura Mazda against the powers of darkness. This Mithra was a god of social order, his gaze piercing enough to see through all deception, his chariot rolling across the heavens as he surveyed the world of men. So how did this Persian god of contracts and cosmic light become the Roman Mithras, a god who slays a bull in a subterranean cavern? The transformation is one of history's great religious mysteries. The Roman legions stationed on the eastern frontiers certainly encountered the worship of this Persian deity. They borrowed his powerful name and perhaps his fundamental association with light and the sun. But almost everything else about the Roman cult appears to be a Chinese letter invention. The central, defining act of the Roman Mithras, the tauroctony, has no parallel in the Iranian traditions. The intricate astrological symbolism, the 7 grades of initiation, the secretive all-male brotherhoods meeting in underground Mithraea, none of this comes from the Persian source. It seems the Romans took the name and the general solar connection of the Iranian god and built an entirely new mystery religion around it, a faith designed to answer the spiritual needs of the soldier far from home. The Persian Mithra was a public upholder of truth, while the Roman Mithras was the focus of a private, esoteric salvation. One god enforced oaths in the light of day, the other revealed cosmic secrets in the flickering torchlight of a hidden cave. This stark difference raises a fascinating question: why create a new god but borrow an old name? Perhaps the name itself carried an aura of ancient power and Eastern wisdom, lending credibility and a sense of deep history to a revolutionary new spiritual path. The story of Mithra shows us that a god can travel, but in the journey, he can be reborn into something entirely and mysteriously new. His grotesque face was a welcome sight in the dark. In the flickering lamplight of an Egyptian home, the most unlikely of guardians watched over the vulnerable. This was Bes, the dwarf god, a divine being whose very ugliness was his power. Unlike the serene, majestic gods carved on temple walls, Bes was a figure of delightful chaos. He was short and stocky, with bowed legs made for dancing, a shaggy lion's mane framing his face, and a tongue perpetually stuck out in a playful grimace. He was the protector of the household, a god who specialized in the most intimate dangers. His primary domain was the night, a time when evil spirits and lurking demons were believed to be most active. To keep these terrors at bay, the image of Bes was everywhere. He was carved into the headrests of beds, his grimacing face the first thing one saw before sleep and the last line of defense against nightmares. His figure was etched onto the handles of mirrors and cosmetic jars, guarding women as they prepared for their day. Small faience amulets bearing his likeness were worn by children and pregnant women, a portable shield against malevolent forces. This was his apotropaic function, the use of a powerful, frightening image to turn away evil. The logic was simple: if a malicious spirit approached a sleeping child and saw the wild, leonine face of Bes staring back, it would be so startled and repelled it would flee. His ugliness was a sacred weapon, his fierce dance a constant, silent ritual of protection performed within the walls of the home. How could such a bizarre figure become a beloved guardian? In a world filled with unseen threats, the comfort came not from a distant, perfect deity, but from a god who was present, who understood the fears of the night and stood ready to face them with a snarl and a dance. A monster's face could be a powerful shield. The terrifying visage of Medusa, with her serpent hair and stony gaze, was not merely a mythic horror, but one of the most widespread apotropaic symbols in the ancient world. This was the power of the Gorgonean, the disembodied head of the Gorgon. Far from being hidden, her face was displayed everywhere as a protective charm. Soldiers painted her glaring image on their shields, hoping her petrifying stare would freeze their enemies in terror before the first spear was thrown. Architects carved her likeness onto the metopes of temples and above city gates, transforming her into a spiritual guardian who could ward off any evil that dared approach. Ordinary people wore her face on amulets and rings, a personal defense against the malevolent forces of the everyday world. The Gorgonean turned the ultimate symbol of fear into a source of safety, its horrific power harnessed to protect the very civilization that told her tragic story. How do you fight darkness? Sometimes you must stare back with a face even more terrifying. If the Gorgon's head guarded the thresholds of the city, another goddess ruled the liminal spaces just beyond the firelight. Hecate was a mistress of boundaries, a triple-formed goddess who held sway over magic, the restless dead, and most importantly, the crossroads, where three roads met in a silent Y under the moon that was her sacred domain. She was a guide and a guardian, but one who commanded fearful respect. Every month on the night of the new moon, those who knew her rites would prepare a humble offering known as the Supper of Hecate. This was not a grand sacrifice on a public altar. A plate of food, often eggs, fish, or a simple cake, would be carried to a remote crossroads and left there for the goddess and her entourage of ghosts. To remain and watch the offering was considered incredibly dangerous, an intrusion upon a divine meal. You would place the food, speak your prayer, and walk away without looking back. By morning, the food would be gone, consumed by stray dogs, wild animals, or perhaps by something else entirely. For her devotees, these suppers were a necessary act of appeasement. To honor Hecate was to ensure she would guide your steps safely through life's many uncertain crossings, and to persuade her to keep her spectral hounds from your door. From the haunted crossroads, we step onto the training grounds of Sparta, where a different kind of chilling devotion was practiced. Here, the god of war was not the complex Ares of Athenian poetry, but a far more primal and brutal figure known as Aeneas. This obscure deity was essentially a deified battle cry, a personification of the sheer, bloodthirsty frenzy of combat. His worship was stripped of all glory and politics, focusing only on the raw act of slaughter. In Sparta, young warriors would perform wild, martial dances in his honor, whipping themselves into a state of mindless fury, becoming living weapons in the service of this terrifying god. Some ancient sources, like the geographer Pausanias, hint at a darker side to this cult, suggesting that in earlier, more savage times, dogs were sacrificed to Aeneas, and some whispers even spoke of human victims. Whether these rumors were true or merely propaganda from Sparta's enemies, they underscore the god's fearsome reputation. He was the embodiment of the killing frenzy that Spartan society was built upon, a divine force that demanded total surrender to the violence of the battlefield. To worship Aeneas was to acknowledge the darkest, most necessary part of the warrior's soul, the part that had to love the carnage to survive it. Deep within the rose-red canyons of Petra, a different kind of stone was worshipped. The Nabateans, the brilliant Arab traders who carved their capital from the living rock, did not pray to statues with human faces. Their supreme god, Dashara, was represented by something far more elemental, a simple, rectangular block of stone. Often carved from dark, black rock, these four-sided obelisks, known as betiles, were placed in high places on mountaintops and within the city's magnificent facades. Dashara's name itself means he of the Shara, identifying him with the mountain range that defined his people's homeland. He was a god of the high places, of the sun that beat down on the desert, and of the very earth that provided the Nabateans with their wealth and security. This aniconic representation was not a sign of primitive belief, but a profound theological statement. The Nabateans saw the divine not as a being in human form, but as a raw, untamed power that could not be confined to a human likeness. The stone block was a focal point for this immense, impersonal force, a symbol of permanence and stability in a harsh and unpredictable landscape. Dashara was also inextricably linked to the Nabatean royal family, serving as their divine patron and a symbol of the kingdom's strength. His worship was central to their identity, a spiritual anchor for a civilization that controlled the lucrative incense trade routes. But when the Roman Empire annexed the Nabatean kingdom in the 2nd century, a fascinating transformation began. The Romans, encountering this powerful, aniconic god, struggled to understand him. They sought a familiar face for this foreign power, and they found one in the most unlikely of places. They began to syncretize Dashara with their own god of ecstatic release, Dionysus. On the surface, it seems a strange pairing, a stern mountain god of the desert and the flamboyant god of wine and theater. Yet the connection was not entirely without logic. Both deities were associated with the life force of nature, Dashara through the life-giving power of mountains and sun, Dionysus through the vine. The Nabateans themselves had a tradition of feasting and communal drinking, which the Romans may have interpreted through a Dionysian lens. So, in the Roman period, you begin to see inscriptions to Dionysus Dashers. The simple, powerful stone betiles were sometimes even carved with the face of Dionysus, his features emerging from the once featureless block. It was a religious compromise, an attempt to translate the soul of a conquered people into a language their new rulers could comprehend. The silent stone of the desert now whispered the name of a foreign god of frenzy, a final, poignant echo of a kingdom slowly fading into the sand. The blood of the bulls soaked into the rocky soil of Anatolia long before it ever stained the marble of Rome. Cybele was not a foreign import here, but the land itself, a primal force worshipped in the stark, wind-scoured highlands of Phrygia. Her home was not a temple built by human hands, but the living rock, the deep caverns, and the wild mountain peaks. Here, she was not the Great Mother tamed by a distant senate, but Mater Cubilia, the Mountain Mother, a goddess whose presence was felt in the earthquake's rumble and the lion's roar. Her most sacred sites were carved directly into the cliff faces, vast, open-air sanctuaries where the sky was the only roof. At Yazilikaya, the great rock-cut facade stands as a silent testament to her power, its geometric patterns and niches meant to channel her raw, untamable energy. In these high places, her worship was a direct conversation with the savage heart of nature. The original rites were likely far more visceral than even the Roman day of blood. Prophecy here was not a matter of consulting written oracles, but of ecstatic possession. Followers would work themselves into a trance through wild, percussive music and frenzied dancing, seeking to become empty vessels for the goddess's voice. In this state, they were believed to speak with her authority, their cries echoing through the stone chambers as if the mountain itself were giving counsel. The connection to wild beasts was not symbolic, it was literal and terrifying. Lions were not just her companions, they were manifestations of her furious power. The myth of her doomed lover, Attis, may have had a much darker, more ancient ending in its original form. Some scholars suggest that before his self-castration, he was torn apart by the goddess's sacred animals, a victim of sparagmos, the same ritual dismemberment practiced by the followers of Dionysus. This would have been a sacrifice to the goddess of the wild, a return of life to the source of all life in the most brutal way imaginable. How do you approach a deity who is the earthquake and the avalanche? You do not build her a palace in the city center. You go to her in the places where civilization ends and the ancient world begins. The Roman state took this raw geological power and tried to set it within a gilded cage on the Palatine Hill. But in the Anatolian highlands, Cybele remained what she had always been, the untamed mother whose love was as fierce and dangerous as the natural world she commanded. Along the misty banks of the Rhine, soldiers far from home carved their prayers in stone for 3 seated women. Thousands of these altars, erected not to the gods of Rome but to the Germanic matrony, stand as a quiet testament to a different kind of divine power. These were the mother goddesses, almost always depicted as a triad, a powerful unit of feminine authority. The 2 outer figures often wear the distinct, long hooded cloaks of married Germanic women, while the central matron is frequently shown with uncovered hair, a symbol of her untamed virginal power. They sit serenely, their laps filled with baskets overflowing with fruit, grain, or bread, their very posture an embodiment of provision and protection. Unlike the universal gods of the Roman pantheon, the matrony were profoundly local. Their inscriptions are startlingly specific, naming them as the guardians of a particular place or people. A stone might be dedicated to the matrony Orphanii, the mothers of the Orphanian district, or the matrony Vacaline, the protectors of the Vacalini tribe. They were the divine embodiment of the homeland, the spiritual mothers who watched over the fertility of the soil, the health of the clan, and the continuity of generations. For a Roman soldier stationed on this cold northern frontier, perhaps a conscript from Gaul or a native Germanic auxiliary, dedicating an altar to these local mothers was a way to seek favor from the land itself, to ask for protection in a foreign post by honoring the spirits who truly ruled it. The inscriptions on these stones reveal a fascinating cultural fusion. The language is Latin, the carving style is Roman, and the dedicants often have Romanized names. Yet the goddesses themselves and the very concept of their worship are deeply rooted in Celtic and Germanic tradition. This is the story of conquest written in prayer, not in battle chronicles. It shows how the conquered could influence the conqueror, how the spiritual landscape of the frontier was a negotiation, a blending of worlds where a soldier might pray to Jupiter one day and to the matrony of his adopted home the next. Why would a military empire built on discipline and order allow such localized tribal devotion to flourish? It was a brilliant, subtle strategy of control. By permitting and even recording these native cults, Rome acknowledged the power of the land and its people, offering a sanctioned outlet for cultural identity that ultimately strengthened the bonds of the empire. The enduring image of the 3 mothers offering their baskets of plenty outlasted legions and emperors, a reminder that the deepest loyalties are often to the soil that feeds you and the mothers who watch over it. The pillars at the end of the world were said to stand not in Spain but in a temple in Tyre. For the Phoenicians, masters of the Mediterranean Sea, their greatest god was Melkart, the king of the city. He was the patron of Tyre, a deity of colonization, maritime power, and the cycle of the dying and rising year. To the Greeks who encountered his worship in their trading ports, this powerful god seemed strangely familiar. They saw in him their own hero, Heracles, a figure of immense strength who also faced a fiery death and apotheosis. The Romans later adopted this same interpretation, calling him Hercules. This was not a perfect match, but a brilliant act of religious translation that allowed 2 cultures to find common ground in a shared divine figure. The heart of his worship was the legendary temple in Tyre, a place so famous it drew pilgrims from across the ancient world, including Alexander the Great, who made a special sacrifice there. Within its sacred precinct stood the original pillars of Hercules. These were not the geological formations at the Strait of Gibraltar, but 2 magnificent gold-clad columns, one of pure gold, the other of emerald, which gleamed with a dazzling fire in the sun. They represented the gateway to the unknown, the limits of the navigable world that Phoenician sailors dared to cross. The most profound ritual of this cult was the annual awakening of Melkart. Each year, the god was believed to die, his divine presence withdrawing from the world. The temple priests would extinguish the sacred fire that perpetually burned within the sanctuary, plunging the site into a symbolic darkness. Then, for a period of mourning, the people would grieve for their fallen king. The climax of the ceremony was a sacred fire ritual, a spectacular rekindling of the temple's flame. This was not just lighting a lamp, it was a cosmic event, a dramatic reenactment of the god's resurrection from death and his return to power. The new fire symbolized the rebirth of vegetation, the return of the sun's strength, and the renewal of Tyre's maritime fortune for another year. Can you envision the scene? A hushed crowd waiting in the dark before the temple, the sudden blaze of the new sacred fire, and the roar of relief and celebration that greeted this divine return. This ritual gave the people a profound sense of agency, their ceremonies directly participating in the salvation of their god, and by extension, the very survival of their city and its far-flung empire. The cult of Melkart reminds us that the gods of navigation and commerce were also gods of life and death, their favor secured not just with trade goods but with fire and faith. The sprawling oak grove at the sanctuary of Voltumna was far more than a place of prayer. It was the beating political heart of the Etruscan people, a civilization that rivaled early Rome. Here, once a year, delegates from the 12 most powerful Etruscan city-states would gather. They did not come merely to honor their chief god, but to make decisions that would shape the fate of their entire league. Voltumna was a deity of both the deep earth and high authority, a god whose will was interpreted by a specialized class of priests, the haruspices. These men were masters of divination, reading the future in the intricate patterns of a lightning bolt scarred across the sky or in the glistening entrails of a sacrificed sheep. The annual meeting at his sanctuary was a profound fusion of faith and statecraft. Amidst the smoke of altars and the chanting of prayers, the leaders would debate alliances, declare war, and elect a ceremonial head for their federation. The very stability of their world depended on maintaining the favor of Voltumna, ensuring that their political actions were in harmony with the divine order he represented. How do you build a nation without a single king? The Etruscans answered by building a sacred meeting ground around the will of a god. Thousands of miles to the east, across the vast, windswept steppes, a different kind of divine power held sway over a nomadic people. The Scythians, fierce horse lords who lived in felt tents and roamed from the Black Sea to the Altai Mountains, worshipped a dominant female deity modern scholars call the Great Goddess. We know her not from grand temples, for the Scythians built none, but from the frozen silence of their burial mounds, the Kurgans. Within these monumental earthen tombs, archaeologists have found her story written in gold. Delicate golden plaques depict her as a mistress of animals, standing frontally, holding powerful beasts like panthers or griffins in each hand. This was not a gentle fertility figure, but a sovereign of the wild, untamable world the Scythians inhabited. Her presence is confirmed by the ritual items buried with priestesses and noblewomen. Elaborate headdresses, mirrors of polished bronze, and ornate combs suggest these women held a sacred, perhaps shamanic, role in mediating with this formidable goddess. The Greeks who encountered Scythian traders along the Black Sea coast saw a reflection of their own Artemis in this powerful figure, a divine huntress who ruled over the beasts and the wilderness. But the Scythian goddess was something more, a primal creator and destroyer who embodied the immense, unforgiving freedom of the steppe itself. Two cultures, one building city-states in Italy, the other roaming an endless grassland, both answered to a supreme divine authority, one found in the organized rustle of oak leaves in a sacred grove, the other in the golden glint of a panther held in the hand of a goddess under the open sky. A number could hold the secret to the universe. This was the radical belief that bound the Pythagorean Brotherhood, a community in the Greek colony of Croton that was part philosophical school, part secret cult, and part political faction. Its founder, Pythagoras, was less a man than a legend in his own time, a figure credited with miracles and divine knowledge. He taught that the cosmos itself was built from mathematics, that the same ratios governing a vibrating lyre string also ruled the motion of the planets, creating a silent, celestial music known as the harmony of the spheres. To live in accordance with this divine order required a complete transformation of one's life. new members surrendered their personal property to live communally, embracing a life of strict discipline and secrecy. They were bound by a set of bizarre and specific rules, many of which seem more like magical taboos than philosophical principles. Do not step over a crossbar. Do not stir a fire with an iron poker. Never eat from a whole loaf of bread, but always break it first. The most famous rule was the vow of silence. Initiates were required to listen for 5 years without speaking, absorbing the master's teachings before they were deemed worthy to contribute. At the heart of their lifestyle was a commitment to vegetarianism, but this was not a simple dietary choice. It was rooted in the doctrine of metempsychoses, the transmigration of souls. The Pythagoreans believed that the soul was immortal and cycled through countless lives, inhabiting the bodies of animals, humans, and even plants. To eat a bean or a piece of meat was to risk committing a horrific act of cannibalism upon a friend or relative whose soul might be trapped within. How could you know if the lamb you were about to roast did not contain the soul of your own departed father? This belief made every meal a spiritual and ethical minefield. Their obsession with numbers went far beyond mere calculation. They saw spiritual meaning in numerical patterns. The number 1 was the monad, the divine source of all things. 4 represented justice, as it was the first number that was the product of equals. 10, the holy tetractys, was the most sacred of all, as it was the sum of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and could be arranged in a perfect pyramidal pattern of dots that they used as a secret symbol and swore their oaths upon. This mystical numerology gave them a sense that they alone possessed the key to understanding reality itself. For a time, their influence in Croton was immense. Their reputation for wisdom and moral integrity won them political power, and they shaped the city's laws according to their philosophical ideals. But this very success bred resentment. Their secretive, elitist nature and their hold on the government led to a violent uprising. An angry mob eventually surrounded their meeting house and set it ablaze. Pythagoras himself is said to have perished in the flames, refusing to escape by crossing a bean field, for violating one of his own sacred taboos was a fate he considered worse than death. The Brotherhood was scattered, their political project destroyed, but their mystical ideas about the soul and the mathematical fabric of the cosmos would echo through the centuries, influencing philosophers from Plato to the modern day. At the very heart of Rome's masculine political world, a secret was unfolding behind closed doors. The cult of Bonadea, the good goddess, was an exclusively female domain, a sacred space where the city's most influential women gathered to perform rites from which all men, from the highest consul to the lowest slave, were utterly banned. Each year in early December, the festival was hosted in the home of a senior Roman magistrate, its rooms meticulously purified and stripped of all male imagery. Even depictions of male animals were removed or covered, creating a sanctuary of feminine spirituality. Here, the Vestal Virgins would lead the other matrons of Rome in secret ceremonies to ensure the fertility and health of the state, praying to a goddess of healing, chastity, and protection. The rituals were profoundly secret, but we know they involved the sacrifice of a sow, an animal sacred to the goddess, and the ceremonial consumption of wine. Yet in this sacred female space, wine was never called by its proper name. It was referred to only as milk, a symbolic act that transformed the potent drink into a nurturing, life-giving substance, further distancing the rite from the male-dominated world of Roman politics and public life. The absolute prohibition against men was not just a tradition, it was a sacred boundary believed to be essential for the ritual's power and for the safety of Rome itself. So what happens when that boundary is violently broken? The answer arrived in the form of a notorious young politician, Publius Clodius Pulcher. In 62 BC, when the rites were being held in the home of Julius Caesar, then the Pontifex Maximus, Clodius devised an audacious plan. Disguising himself as a female lute player, he infiltrated the sacred ceremony. He was recognized almost immediately by the hostess, Caesar's mother Aurelia, and the house was thrown into an uproar. The women drove him out and the rites were abandoned, their power defiled. The resulting scandal shook Rome to its foundations. Clodius was put on trial for sacrilege, a charge that carried the death penalty. The trial became a political circus with figures like Cicero testifying against him. Clodius ultimately escaped conviction, many believed, through bribery and intimidation. But the damage was done. The affair exposed the raw tensions between Rome's ancient religious traditions and the cutthroat personal ambitions of its political elite. How could a single man's transgression threaten the very spiritual fabric of the Republic? The Bonadi scandal was more than just gossip. It was a tear in the sacred veil, a stark reminder that even the most powerful men in Rome could be held accountable, at least for a moment, by the secret power of its women. The desert wind still whispers the name of Bel. In the great caravan city of Palmyra, this was the supreme god, the lord of the cosmos, whose favor meant the difference between life and death in the merciless Syrian desert. His temple was not merely a building, it was the spiritual anchor of an entire civilization, one of the largest and most significant religious complexes in the entire ancient Near East. The scale was staggering, a vast courtyard larger than a modern football field, surrounded by towering columns with ornate carved brackets that once held the statues of the city's most generous patrons. At its heart stood the central shrine, a masterpiece of stone and devotion, but Bel did not rule alone. He presided over a powerful celestial triad. By his side stood Aglibol, the moon god, depicted with a crescent moon halo, and Yahibol, the sun god, shown with a radiant solar nimbus. Together, they represented the fundamental forces of the universe, the Sky Father, the cool night, and the life-giving day, a divine administration overseeing the cosmic order. The worship of Bel was a brilliant tapestry of cultural fusion. He was the continuation of the ancient Mesopotamian god Baal, a storm deity of immense power. To this core, the Pomerans wove Arabian desert traditions and the artistic styles of their Greek and Roman trading partners. A sculpture of Bel might show him in the armor of a Roman general, yet holding a Mesopotamian divine weapon, his face bearing the serene grace of a Greek god. This was not confusion but confidence, a testament to a people who moved effortlessly between worlds, absorbing the best of each into their own unique identity. Their god was a universal sovereign, understandable to a Roman soldier, a Babylonian priest, and a Bedouin trader alike. This magnificent symbol of ancient syncretism stood for nearly 2,000 years, a silent witness to the rise and fall of empires. Then, in 2015, the world watched in horror as militants from ISIS deliberately detonated explosives within the temple's central cella. The blast reduced the heart of this sacred space to a pile of rubble. They targeted Bel not for political reasons, but for theological ones, seeing in its ancient, blended piety an affront to their rigid dogma. In a few moments of dust and fury, a direct link to the spiritual life of a lost world was severed. The destruction was a stark, painful reminder of the fragility of our shared human heritage, and a tragic echo of the very religious intolerance that the cult of Bel, in its beautiful complexity, had always transcended. The story of the divine king began with a desperate act of concealment. High on the slopes of Mount Ida on the island of Crete, a sacred cave was revered as the very place where the infant Zeus was hidden from his own father, the devourer Cronus. This was not the familiar tale of a god born in glorious light, but a myth of vulnerability and salvation, a secret childhood that inverted the natural order. To protect her youngest son from being consumed, the goddess Re gave Cronus a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes to swallow instead. She then smuggled the real infant to this remote cavern, entrusting him to the care of the Curids. These were not mere shepherds, but divine, armed dancers, demons of the wild. Their sacred duty was to create an overwhelming cacophony. As the baby Zeus cried, they performed a furious, clashing war dance, beating their spears against their bronze shields with such relentless force that the sound drowned out his wails, keeping the terrible secret from his father's ears. In this Cretan version of the myth, the god-king was not born in power but was saved by it, his first moments guarded by the thunderous rhythm that would one day become his own weapon. The cave itself, the Psychro Cave on Mount Ida, became one of the most important pilgrimage sites in the ancient Greek world. For centuries, seekers made the arduous climb to this holy grotto, a place dripping with stalactites and filled with a profound, earthy silence. They came not to see a majestic statue of the bearded Sky Father, but to witness the humble origins of his power. The worship here was strikingly aniconic, meaning it focused on objects rather than human-like images. At the heart of the sanctuary stood a sacred pillar, a beetile, which was believed to be the very omphalos or navel of the world, marking the spot where the future king of the gods drew his first breath. This pillar was not just a stone, it was an axis mundi, a connection point between the earthly and divine realms, a symbol of the stable, enduring power that Zeus would later embody. Why would a civilization worship a pillar in a dark cave for a god of the bright sky? The cult of the Cretan Zeus celebrated the god's chthonic, or underworld, origins, his connection to the raw, primal earth that nurtured him in his moment of greatest need. The rituals here were a powerful reminder that even the highest authority has humble, hidden beginnings, and that true strength is often forged not in the open but in the protective darkness. The final two forgotten cults force us to confront the most disturbing question of all: how far could devotion go? In the bustling North African port of Carthage, the cult of Baal-Hamon presented a terrifying face of divine power. Baal-Hamon was the city's chief god, a king of the heavens who demanded absolute loyalty, and the evidence suggests that loyalty was sometimes paid with the ultimate price. Across the Mediterranean, archaeologists have uncovered sacred precincts called tophets. These were not cemeteries for the naturally deceased, but unique, walled enclosures filled with row upon row of small, lidded urns. Inside these urns are the charred bones of young children, from newborns to toddlers, often mingled with the cremated remains of lambs and kids. Each urn was typically marked with a stone stela, a small carved slab inscribed with a dedication to Baal-Hamon. The inscriptions are chillingly formulaic, a donor thanking the god for hearing their prayer and offering this MLK sacrifice in return. The word MLK is the key to the entire controversy. It signifies a specific type of votive offering, one that was pledged in a moment of extreme crisis or in hopes of an immense divine favor. Was this a literal sacrifice of a firstborn son to secure a military victory or save the city from plague? Or was it a symbolic substitution where the animal in the urn represented the child, who was then redeemed and raised in the service of the temple? The scholarly debate is fierce and deeply uncomfortable. Some argue the sheer number of urns spanning centuries points to a sustained, institutionalized practice. Others contend the bones show no signs of violence beyond the fire, and that these were stillborn infants or children who died of natural causes, given to the god in a sacred funeral rite since they were too young for a proper burial. Yet ancient Greek and Roman historians, who were Carthage's bitter enemies, wrote with horror of bronze statues of the god with outstretched, sloping arms, upon which a living child was placed before rolling down into a pit of fire. Whether propaganda or grim reality, this image of the burning child would echo for centuries, becoming fused with the most terrifying name in the biblical tradition, Moloch. The biblical Moloch is a demonic figure, a god to whom the Canaanites were said to sacrifice their children by fire, an abomination so great it warranted divine punishment. But the historical reality of Moloch is more complex. The name itself is likely not a proper name at all, but a deliberate Hebrew distortion of the word MLK. By adding the vowels from the Hebrew word for shame, bosheth, the biblical writers created Melech or Moloch, turning a punic ritual term into a monstrous entity. The MLK sacrifice was a real ritual, but Moloch as a distinct god may have been a terrifying phantom, a theological bogeyman created to warn the Israelites against adopting the customs of their neighbors. The line between ritual and atrocity, between sacred vow and unspeakable crime, blurs in the smoky air of the Tophet. For the Carthaginian parent, placing their child's remains in that sacred ground may have been the highest act of faith, a guarantee of divine protection for their family and their entire civilization. For the outside observer, then and now, it remains one of the most challenging and haunting practices of the ancient world. What does it say about a society when its most profound offering to the gods is the future itself? The fading of these mysteries was not a single event, but a slow dusk settling over 1,000 different gods. Their disappearance was woven from several powerful threads, each pulling at the fabric of ancient belief. The most visible force was the rise of Christianity, a faith that began as a persecuted sect but grew into an imperial religion with the power to enforce its doctrine. Unlike the flexible paganism that came before it, Christianity claimed an exclusive truth. It viewed the old gods not as different paths to the divine, but as dangerous demons masquerading as deities. Once the Roman emperors converted, the full weight of the state shifted. Laws were passed to close temples, banning the ancient sacrifices that had sustained these cults for centuries. The public funding for festivals dried up, and the sacred fires in temples to Vesta or Cybele were extinguished for the last time. This was not always a peaceful transition. Mobs of Christian monks, empowered by imperial decrees, would sometimes descend upon rural sanctuaries, toppling statues and desecrating the very sites where generations had sought healing or revelation. Yet even without this external pressure, many of these cults carried the seeds of their own demise within their sacred structures. Their greatest strength was often their greatest weakness. A religion like Mithraism, which thrived on secrecy and a demanding initiation process, created an incredibly loyal brotherhood, but it could never become a mass movement. By excluding women, civilians, and anyone unwilling to undergo its severe trials, it limited its own growth, remaining an elite spiritual club in a world that was increasingly searching for universal salvation. Other cults were so deeply tied to a specific political order that they could not survive its collapse. The cult of the imperial cult lost its purpose when the last Roman emperor in the West was deposed. The worship of Jupiter Dolichanes, so vital to the frontier legions, faded as those legions disbanded or retreated, their forts left to the wind. When the Roman Empire fractured, the entire spiritual ecosystem it supported fractured with it. For many everyday people, the old ways did not so much vanish as they were absorbed. The human desire for divine protection and a bountiful harvest did not disappear, it simply found new vessels. The humble household spirits, the lares and penates, were gradually replaced by the veneration of Christian saints, who became the new patrons of the home, the farm, and the journey. The maternal care of Isis found a powerful echo in the figure of the Virgin Mary. Even the celebration of the unconquered sun on December 25th was reborn as Christmas, the old symbolism of light conquering darkness seamlessly repurposed for a new faith. This process of syncretism was a gentle death, a fading of names and stories while the underlying human needs they answered lived on, clothed in new traditions. So, did these 50 cults truly vanish, or did they instead dissolve back into the collective human spirit, their specific rituals forgotten, but their core questions about life, death, and the divine continuing to shape our search for meaning in an uncertain world? The stones may have fallen silent, but their whispers never truly ceased. The legacy of these forgotten cults did not vanish into the void, but seeped into the bedrock of our cultural imagination, resurfacing in surprising ways. Consider the myth of the dying and rising god, a story told of Osiris, Attis, and Adonis. This powerful narrative of sacrifice and renewal found a profound new expression in the central story of Christianity, the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, giving an ancient archetype a transformative new meaning. The maternal, all-encompassing figure of Isis, the great protectress, finds a clear echo in the veneration of the Virgin Mary, who embodies a similar divine compassion and intercessory power. Even the secretive initiation rites of the mystery cults, promising personal salvation through esoteric knowledge, have their mirror in the structured degrees and symbolic rituals of modern fraternal organizations. The past is not dead, it is simply waiting to be recognized in the familiar contours of our present. This recovery of lost voices is an ongoing process, driven by the patient work of the trowel and the brush. Every archaeological discovery forces us to redraw the map of ancient belief. The unearthing of a new Mithraeum beneath a modern city, or the deciphering of a cache of Orphic gold tablets, is more than just adding to a museum's collection. It is an act of spiritual resurrection. These artifacts are direct messages from the adherents themselves, challenging the histories written by their rivals or conquerors. They reveal a spiritual landscape far more diverse, personal, and fluid than the official records of Rome or the philosophical texts of Athens ever let on. We now know that a Roman soldier could swear an oath to Jupiter Dolicinus in the morning, make a small offering to Epona at his stable in the afternoon, and that evening seek a vision of salvation in the underground temple of Mithras. This was not a world of exclusive belief, but one of layered and practical devotion. The most direct line to these ancient practices, however, runs through the modern neo-pagan movements. Contemporary followers of traditions like Hellenism or various nature-based spiritualities are actively and intentionally reviving the worship of these old gods. They study the same myths, honor the same deities like Zeus, Athena, or Dionysus, and attempt to reconstruct the rituals based on historical and archaeological evidence. For them, these are not dead stories, but living pathways to the divine. The wild ecstasy of the Maenads finds its spirit in ecstatic dance rituals today. The household veneration of the Lares is echoed in modern pagan practices of creating ancestor altars and honoring the spirits of the home. This is not mere historical reenactment, but a genuine attempt to breathe new life into very old spiritual bones, proving that the human yearning for a connection to the divine in all its varied forms is a constant across the centuries. So the next time you see a symbol that feels strangely familiar, or feel a pull toward a story of a god who dies and is reborn, you might just be hearing the faint, persistent echo of a cult the world forgot, but humanity never truly left behind. Our journey ends here in the fading echo of 50 forgotten voices. We have walked from torchlit caverns to sun-scorched deserts, from the ecstatic cries of the Maenads to the silent vows of Mithras. This was not a tour of a single truth, but an exploration of a vast and varied tapestry of belief, a testament to the boundless creativity of the human spirit in its search for meaning. Whether through the bloody devotion offered to Cybele, the celestial maps of the Tauroctony, or the humble prayers whispered to Epona, these cults all answered a profound and universal need. They offered community in a vast and often lonely world, an explanation for the terrifying chaos of nature, and a tangible connection to a power greater than oneself. They gave people a role in the cosmic story, a way to influence the harvest, to protect their homes, or to secure a place in the world to come. While their names have faded, the questions they grappled with are as alive today as they were 2,000 years ago. We still seek belonging, we still yearn to understand our place in the universe, and we still look for light in the darkness. The altars are silent now, but the human heart that built them continues its ancient, restless quest. Which of these 50 forgotten paths resonated most deeply with you? Was it the promise of Eleusis, the brotherhood of Mithras, or the quiet protection of the Lares? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the shadows of history, subscribe for more journeys into the world's greatest